All right, so out of all the hand grinders I've used, this is the one that somehow has won me over and become the grinder that I find myself using the most often. And that was kind of surprising to me because there are a lot of hand grinders that in one way or another will do things better than this one will, including grinders from 1Zpresso's own line. This is the K Ultra grinder from 1Zpresso. So amidst their range, they have the J series, which is more tuned for espresso. They have the ZP6, which is really tuned for filter. And then they have the K series, which is their all-around series. It picks up from the K Max with some ergonomic changes, a new handle that will kind of twist around like this, slightly updated burr geometry, some very slight adjustments to the dial mechanism up here. 1Zpresso sent me this grinder last year, I think October or November, and I've been messing around with it ever since. They didn't ask me to make any videos with it. They just said, hey, let us know what you think. And I have some thoughts. Before we get to my thoughts though, let's take a look at it. So this is definitely what I would call a premium hand grinder. It's kind of on the upper end of the pricing spectrum when it comes to hand grinders. It comes in at $260 US. Once again, it's an all-around grinder, so very suitable for both filter and espresso. It's basically all metal construction, excluding this little plastic piece on the cap here. And like many hand grinders, it's very intuitive to use. You put your coffee in the top here, you adjust your setting with this external dial right here, and then you put the handle on and start grinding your coffee. And then when you're all done, you take the catch cup off and it'll be full of your ground coffee, and you put that either into your pour over dripper or your espresso portafilter. The catch cup is magnetic. Everything feels very solid, very tight, very smooth, very well made, and it's very ergonomic to use too. It comes with this nice little carrying case here, and the grinder just slips in like that. And also it comes with a little brush, which I actually quite like this brush. It's one of my favorite little brushes that I get with accessories. And it did come with a little air puffer, which unfortunately I've since lost, and a rubber grip band. In my experience, that was helpful for espresso, but not needed at all when you're grinding for filter. And I lost that too. Now, as far as taste goes with this grinder, I kind of refer to it like the easy button of hand grinders. Like whatever you throw at it, it's gonna spit back a good result for you. On filter, I found it would give these nice, juicy, big cups, still with good clarity and separation without sacrificing body, sweetness, or a well-rounded cup. And on espresso, it's a very similar story. It's going to give you a right up the middle profile, easy to dial in, good clarity, lots of definition, not a lot of astringency, but still good body, good sweetness, very thick shots. And that's kind of rare for a grinder to deliver all of that. Now, there are grinders that will do both filter and espresso better in some ways, and we're going to talk about why I find myself coming back to this one in a minute. But first, let's talk about cleaning and taking it apart. It's got this little knob up here, and you just provide a little bit of pressure on the bottom burr, and then you unscrew this little washer here. And when you do that, another little washer and the top bearing will come out, and then the burr assembly pops right out, just like that. And at this point, you're almost totally cleaned out. You just have to take the top off, and then you can get in there and clean everything out with your brush. It's very fast, very easy to do. One thing that I really like is it's got this solid central axle, which really is a good thing when it comes to maintaining a good alignment with this grinder. It uses a 7-sided or heptagonal burr, which is something that you will see commonly used with light roast grinders to slow the feed rate, produce better grind consistency, that type of thing. And when you go to reassemble the grinder, you just put it all back together, put all the parts in the same order, and then once it's all back together, we're going to calibrate the grinder. And that's actually pretty easy to do. All you do is tighten this little washer up as tight as it will go. And then once it is as tight as it will go, you move the adjustment mechanism as fine as it will go. And if it doesn't line up to 0, you just give a little pressure here and ease that washer off. In my experience, it was about 2 notches to get the dial indicator lined up to 0 here, and then you're fully calibrated. Everything is very premium feeling. Even this kind of textured thing here. When I first saw this, I thought for sure that's going to wear off over time. Nope, it's stayed true, very durable. Workflow is something that people really seem to love about 1Zpresso grinders, and I would agree with that. Now, as far as tests go, I found it would hold somewhere between 35 to 40 grams of coffee beans, depending on the types of coffee that you like to use. Time-wise, for filter coffee, I usually do 16-gram pour-over doses, and I find I could do that in 15 to 20 seconds, so very fast, very easy to grind there. On espresso, it's also actually quite fast, and I could grind an 18-gram espresso dose at an espresso setting in about 30 to 35 seconds. Now, when you're doing that, you're really working. It's hard work grinding at espresso settings, especially if you do like medium lights for your espresso. You're really going to be pushing, and I would maybe even suggest using that rubber ring to give yourself a little bit of better grip so this is not spinning around in your hand when you're grinding, but still pretty quick. On filter, I would typically find myself grinding in the 6.5 to 7 range on the adjustment dial, and on espresso, I was typically between the 2.5 to the 3 range on the adjustment dial, and that's about 5 clicks on their dial. One other thing that I always test is fidelity of grind settings. So how much difference is one step going to make in the timing of your espresso shot? This is something that can really affect how easy a coffee grinder is to dial in on espresso. And this grinder is not going to give you the same kind of fidelity or precision as something like their J series, which is really designed for espresso. I would find I would get somewhere between 4 to 6 seconds in difference of shot time setting to setting. Still though, it wasn't a difficult dial in. The shots were very forgiving, favorable, and for how good this does filter, especially, I find that pretty reasonable actually. So we have a pretty solid all-around grinder, and you might be asking like, okay, so seems great. What's not to like here? And there are a couple reasons why you may want to go in another direction. This is an all-around grinder. So if all you're doing is filter, this is going to give you good flattering filter cups across the board, not the most high clarity grinder. If that's something you're looking for, you may want to look at something like the 1Zpresso ZP6, or if you're willing to jump up in price point, the Pietro with Pro Brews. It's got some workflow issues, but it's pretty hard to beat for clarity. Now, clarity in a filter cup is not always something that's good. In fact, if there is something that is maybe not totally perfect about a roasted coffee, high clarity grinders are going to bring that out. So a lot of the time I find myself wanting to just go for that quick, easy, flattering cup. Likewise, if all you're doing is espresso, you may want to go in a different direction. The burr in the J Ultra series is going to be more tuned for espresso. It's going to generate more fines, which are going to really amp up that body. Now, that means it's not going to work for filter, but it is going to give you a better experience on the espresso side. And the other reason why you may want to go in a different direction, really from my perspective, is the price. This is an expensive grinder, and whenever I have a friend who's kind of new to the coffee scene and they say, hey, I'm looking for a really good grinder, sometimes I forget to step out of my coffee geek bubble and I say, oh, hey, this is like a really good all-rounder, like top notch. And they are like, wow, I did not even realize that there were hand grinders that are that expensive. So this grinder and any grinder in this tier is going to be good for somebody who's willing to spend a little bit more on a hand grinder. Now, the cup per dollar quality, from my perspective, is there, but it's still a couple $100. And for me, in a review, as far as cons list, to be honest, that's a pretty small list because this grinder is just a really solid performer across the board. It's not mind-blowing in any one area, but it is flattering and it's going to give you great cups without the brain work. So one thing that I always do when I'm making these reviews is I go on like a deep dive online and I try and figure out what are the concerns that people will have with this grinder. And as I was doing that, there was one other grinder that people really seem to be comparing this one to that, and that is the Comandante C40. Also a fantastic grinder. Both the C40 and the K Ultra are really good grinders, and they are actually kind of similar in terms of their taste profile. And the reasons why people go with one or the other typically tends to be whatever one they can get the better deal on at that time, or which workflow that they are going to think that they like better. Some people like this easy adjustment mechanism here on the outside. The Comandante has the adjustment in here. Some people prefer that. That kind of seems to be a bit of a personal choice. One thing though that you will find if you go digging is some intellectual property and patent infringement stuff to do between Comandante and other grinder manufacturers such as 1Zpresso. And neither company has made public comment on this. So really, you're kind of at the mercy of the internet, what you find on this stuff. Out of curiosity, I did pull both the burrs out of this one and a C40. I found one comment that said, hey, the burrs in this grinder are a carbon copy of the C40. From my perspective, you know, one is definitely seems to be inspired by the other. They use similar approaches in terms of how the teeth go up the pre-breaker. They're both heptagonal burrs. Comandante did some of that stuff first. The 1Zpresso burr is taller and it uses more cutting teeth per pre-breaker. The 1Zpresso inner burr is actually also a wider diameter, and the C40 burr uses this special nitrogen-rich steel alloy, while the 1Zpresso burr is stainless, and you can even see some finish differences when you look really closely at the two burrs. From my perspective, there are enough differences in the burr geometry that this burr is not a carbon copy, especially in a world where there are people who are producing carbon copies of Comandantes. Not something I endorse, not something I think that you should buy. This grinder, from my perspective, is not that. So for me, I review coffee equipment, and at this point I have, I kid you not, dozens of hand grinders available to use. And over the past while, this has been the one that I find myself grabbing and grinding with the most often. Does it mean it's the only one I use? No, but it is, I'm gonna say, the grinder that I'm using the most regularly. Why is that? For one, it's very nice to use. It feels good in your hand, it's comfortable, it's not too hard to grind, there's nothing that is frustrating or confusing about the user experience, and it's forgiving to dial in. More than that though, it just seems to be very favorable and flattering at whatever you're gonna throw inside. So if I get a new light roast, I'm always getting new and crazy coffees in here, and I'm gonna throw it in there, keep my usual grind setting, toss it in a V60, good result. Toss it in a flat bottom dripper like the Aurea, good result. Are there grinders that I could use to maybe get a hyper clear or maybe a better result? Yes. Am I gonna get a guaranteed fantastic first result on the brew using some of those grinders? Not always. This one lets me get out of the gate, get my brew, have a great cup of coffee sitting in front of me without worrying about dialing in. Same for espresso. Even though most of the time I'm using electric grinders for espresso, anytime I have used this grinder, I eyeball the grind setting. Maybe it pulls a hair faster or slower than I want, but honestly, within the range that I usually start at, it's pretty close and it tastes good. You know, other grinders, it can be very common to spend several shots just getting to a drinkable result. And sometimes those results are really good once you get there. This one, it's very common for me to get a drinkable result on the first shot. And for somebody who spends a lot of time dialing in coffee equipment, when I just want an easy cup, it's really nice to be able to just grab something off the shelf, grind it up, not think about it too much, not even worry necessarily about how I'm brewing it, and end up with a good cup of coffee. When it comes to hand grinders, there is a certain appeal to these hyper specialized grinders that can do really specific things really well. But also, when you're considering a grinder like that, you need to recognize that the higher the highs with a grinder, the lower the lows. So any grinder like that, like let's take the Pietro for example, very expensive, extremely clear cups, hard to beat in that regard, also a nightmare to use. And that clarity is not always going to translate into a favorable cup of coffee. Many of those grinders with those super specialized use cases and features also have a very exaggerated set of strengths and weaknesses. This one is just really just kind of good in a lot of ways and not really very bad in very many ways. So at this point, I think I'd like to actually hear from you. Is an all-rounder hand grinder something that you would consider, or would you be looking for something a little bit more specialized? Are there other hand grinders or stuff that you would love to see me review on this channel? And lastly, if this video was helpful, I would love for you to subscribe. It's an easy and free way that you can support me doing this on this channel, so that would mean a lot. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.